Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out to today's Lunch and Learn. We are happy to have you. Today, we'll be hearing from Shawn Stigler, who is the managing partner of Michael's Best Colorado offices and chair of VentureBest. More than a lawyer, he is a strategic business advisor, guiding companies through all stages of growth. Before joining Michael Best, Shawn founded Modus Law, helping high-growth companies and investors. His career began at Arthur Andersen as a tax accountant and advisor to family offices. A lifelong entrepreneur, Shawn has supported startups and served as a board member for the Entrepreneur Foundation of Colorado. He co-founded the Stigler Nelson Alpine Endeavor Scholarship at CU Law and actively supports organizations like Startup Colorado and the Alliance for Choice in Education. Shawn holds a BS in accounting from the Wisconsin School of Business and a JD from the University of Colorado. Based in Denver, he enjoys biking and skiing in the mountains. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
All right, let's start with a microphone just so I can be very loud. Everyone hear that okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, first of all, thanks for coming out. It's always interesting. I got here early and there was like 2 people here and I was like, well, they're really nice people, but I hope some more people show up. So it's great to see so many folks. Elizabeth did a great introduction. I love entrepreneurs. I grew up in an entrepreneurial world. I love CSU. I love the community built here. As Elizabeth mentioned, I went to University of Wisconsin, and CSU reminds me so much of University of Wisconsin. Amy Parsons, Scott Schrake, Mike Freeman, the team here is really building a great entrepreneurial platform, and I think one of the things this community's done is really stayed true to its core, and now that's really paying dividends with clean tech, venture, the vet school, so many things. This community, obviously the brewing industry, is just crushing it. So for today, I certainly have some things prepared. I think I was talking to Robbie, there's a variety of different folks here. So I work with folks who are construction companies, engineers, folks like that. I work with a lot of tech companies, consumer products, carbon recapture companies. So the best thing for me, selfishly, in these presentations is you say, hey, I have a question about X, or what about Y, or what the heck are you talking about? So I'm a lawyer. I have zero problems getting interrupted or ask me anything. As Elizabeth mentioned, my background is both law and accounting, so I'm not an accountant anymore, but I still know enough to be dangerous. So if there's questions on that front too, lawyers and accountants are really good at making simple things complicated. So hopefully I can debunk a little bit of that. But if you have questions, let me know. Sound like a good plan?
Yeah.
All right. So just really quick about our firm. We're actually a 176-year-old firm. We're kind of a quiet firm, originally from the Midwest. And the short answer is, or the short story about us is our superpower is really historically working with universities to help entrepreneurs and innovators commercialize their technology. So we kind of got our start at University of Wisconsin, working with Wharf, and now we work for Duke, North Carolina, Notre Dame, CSU, School of Mines, all types of schools. When people have an innovation or some sort of new product, we work with them to help protect their intellectual property, which we'll touch on, and then also set up the company, start commercializing, building that team. Super quick about us. So we have 19 offices around the country. As you can tell, we tend to hub around universities. We have about 400 lawyers, about 200 or 160 IT professionals. So a lot of folks come out of engineering school, chemistry school, pharmacy school, and we actually hire those folks to help with IT because lawyers are somewhat smart, but the people who have PhDs in chemistry or physics or computer science are actually much better than us. So when we're at the bleeding edge of innovation, we need those people. So if you know people in your ecosystem who are looking for an alternative job that have those technical backgrounds, we love hiring those folks. And a lot of times, if they work with us for a few years, we'll put them through law school as well. So it can be a really good opportunity. And then from a startup standpoint, I do have to brag about this, and then I promise we'll dig into content. But we are the second most active firm in the Rocky region for working with startups and venture-backed and high-growth companies. So the firm that beats us is a great firm, but they have about 10 times as many people as we do. So bless you. Per lawyer, we do a lot of work with startups, venture funds, family offices, people who are really supporting entrepreneurs. All right, I'm gonna skip this because it's too much about us. So one of the things that often gets asked, so the way I like to describe myself is an optimist by nature and a pessimist by trade. You know, I love getting to work with entrepreneurs. I love getting to work with people who are making a difference in the world, creating jobs for people. And it's just like such a joy to get to be a little bit of the part of the success of what, you know, a lot of the people in this room do. But unfortunately, there's a lot of things you can do really wrong when you're starting a company or operating a company. And so one of the talks I like to give is just the things to steer clear of, to be careful of, because unfortunately, if you make these mistakes, you might have to pay a lawyer, an accountant a lot of money, or you might not be able to sell your business for what you want, or you might not be able to hire the right people. So please know, I'm a very optimistic person, but I wanted to share a couple things that can go wrong. So there's a great founder, investor, and leader named Jim Collins, and he has a famous saying that says, get the right people on the bus. And so the very most important thing, I think, when you're starting a business, and we see this a lot in the university ecosystem, is you get people who have very similar backgrounds and very similar skills. And one of the things you'll learn, and Jim Potts, for those who know, CSU has a great incubator program, which if you're interested, I'm happy to connect you afterwards. But working with folks to get the right people on the team from day one. And if you're raising capital, that's incredibly important because VCs hate to see what we call dead weight. So the person who maybe was part of the idea and then went to go work for Google that still owns 20% of the company, that'll kill your chances to raise capital. If you're operating, a retail business or a Main Street business, then you know it every time you have to write that person a check or a salary and they're not really covering their weight, it's a killer. So setting clear expectations early, and then, again, like I said, having complementary skill sets. One of the things I really push people to do, there's a great book, I'm sure a lot of people know, X for Dummies. So there's business plans for dummies. If you're looking at starting a business, it's a great book. It's a great resource. There's a bunch of other ones too, but just sitting down with your other team members, your co-founders, and making sure, the example I would give is, I'm an accountant, so a lot of times when I'm working on a board or with a company, people say, oh, Shawn's an accountant, he can handle our books because that's his background. I'd rather jump out of a window than be the accountant for a company. There's a reason I don't do that anymore. And so having that conversation and having people know, hey, that's something we're going to have to hire for, we're going to have to find, versus just making assumptions. So maybe I'll just give it a quick pause there. Any questions on? All right.
Yeah, you've spoken a lot about the disadvantages of bringing on the wrong people for your team.
Yep.
What if you want to stay solo?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the disadvantages?
Yeah, great question. So I think if you want to stay solo, there's a lot of conversations right now about solopreneurship, and it could be a great way to go. So depending on the business, the good news is you control everything. The bad news is you control everything. So everything's kind of on your shoulders. So I think being really honest with yourself about what your strengths and aptitudes are and where you have blind spots is really important when you're a solo entrepreneur. And then finding, the good thing is, like say you don't love accounting, really good fractional accounting companies now that you can really reasonably work with folks. There's a great company a friend of mine started. I'm not an investor, I don't get a kickback, but it's called Forecaster. I'm a big fan of this company. So we'll talk about Carta later, but Forecaster is an online financial modeling software / accounting predictability software. It's spelled like the cool kid way, CSTR or something like that. You'll find, if you don't find it, let me know, I'll follow up, but, I love that software. There's a lot of software you can use now to sort of give yourself a cheat code to help with this, but I think really figuring out what you like doing, what you're good at, and what you're not, and then finding resources where you're not. So.
And how do venture capitalists look at someone who's solo?
It's a great question. So some accelerators and some venture capitalists will not invest in solo entrepreneurs. Not all of them, but some of them. Foundry, which was based in Boulder, which is winding down right now, but they always needed at least two. That was like one of their theses. But that being said, it's really changing. And again, you could find, you know, we'll talk about giving equity too, but you can be the sole owner, but still bring in good people, motivate them, incentivize them as you grow, but maybe they're not technically a co-founder. Because one of the adages I tell our founders all the time is, I consider myself the shepherd of your equity. It's so easy to give away part of your company, and it's so hard to get it back. And so you need to be really stingy about that. And there's ways, probably beyond the scope of today, but there's ways you can kind of date before you marry when it comes to equity. So you can create what we call like phantom equity or things like that, that give people the feeling of upside without actually being a partner. And that can be a win-win. So I own my own business for a long time and own several, and that means you're personally guaranteeing that lease. You're personally guaranteeing that line of credit. Your house is on the line. And, you know, not everyone wants that. Not everyone can do that. And so you can create incentives for people to really motivate them without them having that burden. Maybe not as much benefit either, but, you know, not having that burden. So, is that helpful? Yeah. All right, this is fun.
So are you going to talk about this later, sort of issues around cap tables?
Yep.
And, you know, you mentioned 20% walking out the room when some employee leaves. That
Yeah.
sounds like a lot of equity.
Absolutely. Yeah. If I said 20%, I maybe just used it flippantly.
Do it as a number.
Yeah. We'll definitely talk about cap tables, but let me come to that, because I do have a slide on that. So, and if I don't specifically address it, just stick your hand up, we'll talk about it more. So employees, especially in a small business, this sounds harsh, but you gotta hire fast and fire fast. Toxic employees are the death now, and I've dealt with it, and I'm a pleaser by nature, and I've kept people on too long, and it wasn't good for them, it wasn't good for me. So this is one, you know, I've failed on, to be honest with you, but we're working better. So really having the right employees. The good news is, Elizabeth and I were just talking about this, the market is tempering a little bit. During COVID, I will tell you, as leader of a law firm, it was impossible to find enough people. You know, similar time, sales engineers, other types of engineers, it was impossible. Now the market's equaling back out. We're trying to get to an equilibrium. So I think it's a much better time. There's a lot more talent out there. The third bullet point there on employees is, especially as a startup, you want to be measured in your hiring. You know, I have a lot of adages, having done this for a couple decades. You know, overhead kills. You get even variable overhead, which is technically what employees are. That big nut every month that you have to clear, or the burn rate, really kills a lot of companies. Kills a lot of good companies, actually. And so just being mindful and judicious and getting people who really, you know, want to participate and have that ownership pushing mentality if you're looking at a startup. The last slide on or last topic on choosing the right people is the investors. So I'm old enough, I've been through a couple, I lived in California right before the dot-com bubble, saw that blow up. I lived through 2008, happened to be right when I started my firm, which was fun. And then, you know, we just had this interesting moment in venture and finances the last couple of years. And I think up until about 2023, everything was up and to the right in venture. you could be a monkey with a dartboard, and make money in venture. And Elizabeth and I, we're just talking, right now we're having a big liquidity issue in venture capital. So a lot of things are marked up on paper. These funds have made investments and they're up, but nothing's been selling. Nothing's been reaching liquidity. And this isn't a political statement at all, but we are seeing now a lot more M&A the first quarter. If you look at any statistics, PitchBook does great statistics, TechCrunch does great statistics. A lot of mid-market M&A. We just saw Google announce they're buying a company called Wiz, which is one of the first big like FANG companies to get a deal through. We'll see if it goes through, but I think it will. And so once that happens, we're gonna see, I think, a real flood again. I'm personally, what I think is by middle of this year, the venture market's gonna be much more robust, much more aggressive again. Early stage is still doing okay. Mid and late stage is almost dead right now. And so part of that, the reason I kind of give you that background is, for those folks who only saw venture from, say, 2010 to 2022, their venture capitalists were their friends, everything was roses, everyone was just making money. Well, in the last couple of years, all of a sudden people are finding out venture capitalists are not your friends, they're your investors. They don't have the same interests you do. There's a phenomenal book called The Power Law. I highly recommend if you're interested in the space. But the way venture capital funds work is they invest in 10 companies. One returns the fund, the 10x return, 100x return, 1000x returns. Two tread water, and then the rest of them, they actually want to be gone, so they don't have to spend the time being on the board, managing the company, whatever. So if they get 2 unicorns, great. But if they have 5 or 6 companies that are like treading water and need more money, they don't want those. It's a time suck for them. And I'm simplifying, there's nicer VC funds in this. But if you really break it down, if you look at the stats of venture capital as a whole, that's how it works. And so one of the things people were realizing, and I could give you some stories of Colorado companies, is funds pumped in money, more money than these companies probably needed or wanted. They failed, and then they killed them. They sell the assets, they're done. So I think one of the things, especially now, where we're kind of in this reboot of venture, is be really thoughtful about who your investors are. What do they bring to the table? What's their network? Are they going to support you in the next round? Talk to other folks who have invested with them. And this applies to private equity, family offices, whoever, cool kids call it capital allocators now. Whoever's putting money in motion to support you, do your homework. Because when things get choppy, you will see not all of them are the nicest folks in the world.
Quick question.
Of course.
I've been told by a lot of people to be very careful and to even avoid investors because their goals may not align with mine. I want to build a company.
Yep.
I don't want to build it to flip. I want to build it to last.
Yep.
Are there investors who are interested in that scenario?
Yeah.
Or do they just want to flip it and get their money back?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. It opens a great conversation. So venture capitalist is one type, and I know we have a lot of different, can you hear me okay like this? Okay. I know sometimes microphones are annoying. Venture capitalists, to your point, have this power law mandate, and their investors are pensions, hospitals, things like that. They need big returns. They need home runs. So they have this very targeted process. Private equity is another type of tool where they invest in companies, and a lot of times that can be construction companies. The biggest thing going the last couple of years was HVAC companies, dentists, and hospital clinics. That's what all the private equity funds were investing in.
I'm an HVAC. I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, so that's what my family does in Wisconsin. So yeah, so that was their thing. What private equity has sort of 2 mindsets. One is you're dumb. You could be running your business better. I'm going to give you some money, and in 5 years, I'll be able to sell your company for twice as much. I'm not saying you're dumb, I'm saying that's what.
I get it, yeah.
You're like,
Actually,
that
the
guy's a
success
jerk.
of a lot of these going into HVAC.
Yep.
So again, I've seen it firsthand.
Exactly. So you have venture capital, private equity, and then what we call a lot of times patient capital. And so I work with a lot of family offices and other sort of alternative investors. And those folks can be awesome investors for what you're talking about. They say, hey, I'll tell you, Jamie Finney is another one, who's part of Greater Colorado Venture Fund, but has spun out, where he says, hey, you know what? Like his fund, for example, says, especially in rural Colorado, there's a lot of great anchor businesses that maybe the founder's 65 years old now, and they don't have a good succession plan. But if that HVAC company goes away, 20 people might lose their jobs in Salida or, you know, wherever. And so what he's doing is saying, hey, I'm going to help fund your company, let you take some money off the table, but also maybe help the employees over time buy your company, maybe help you if there's other companies in the area merge. But he has no timeline. If he helps you take some money off the table for 20 years, great. So that's like a third tranche. And then the fourth tranche, employees transitioning, helping buy. I'll tell you, you know, another adage is great employees often make terrible owners. So, you know, if you have employees, a lot of times they just don't have an owner mindset. They want their paycheck on time, the same amount, and that's fine. You know, there's a place for everyone. But, so yeah, I would say investors, you have to be real careful because usually they have an ulterior motive, and usually it's time sensitive. Private equity needs to flip those companies every 5 years. And that, again, that can be okay. I can tell you some great outcomes of companies, but, you know, I think if I were advising you, what I'd say is, what do you really want? Are you looking to de-risk a little bit? Are you looking to transition to family? Are you looking to transition to employees? You know, what do you want?
Okay.
And then we find the right tool.
Okay.
So this is great. One other really quick thing, if you're going to take investors, and I deal with this so much, is you're just starting out, you're scraping by, whether it's a HVAC company or a new app, and you say, oh, this guy, he's kind of a pain, but he's going to give me $100 grand, I really need it. And oh, once you start working on the investment, yeah, they want these really weird terms, but I just need the money, I'm just going to do it. That is the person. I just closed a 9-figure transaction with a company that started here and moved to Austin. One jackwagon who gave this company 50 grand, you know, 7 years ago, almost killed the deal because they were just so difficult. And so it's not just venture capitalists, it's not just, it can be your cousin Joey who doesn't invest in companies, or your Aunt Susie. Be so careful with that early money in the door. It can really cause problems down the road. All right. Good so far? All right. So this one's really, really important, and this one speaks to me a lot. So, you know, you have an HVAC company, you might have a tech startup, you might have a company that owns a lot of intellectual property and is going to license it. There's so many different kinds of companies. And Brad Feld, who's kind of a famous venture capitalist in Colorado, he used to have this post that said, if your lawyer tells you to do anything but be a Delaware C Corp, they're trying to screw you. And if you talk to him now, he said, no, I totally don't think that anymore, but the post lives forever. So there's a lot of different types of entities. Again, lawyers and accountants, we try and complicate the hell out of stuff. But generally, it's 2 buckets. LLC or corporation is really what you want to look at. I worked on LLC law for a long time. Interestingly, a lot of, you know, cocktail party conversation, Wyoming invented the LLC. Little known fact. Wyoming's actually a very progressive corporate state. People don't know that. So LLCs can be an awesome starting point if you're going to be an operating company, if you're going to be a restaurant, if you're going to be something that might license. Sometimes we have like someone with a lot of intellectual property, which we'll talk about, and you might just end up licensing it, partnering with, you know, Ford, or we did one for Jeep, like a navigation type thing with Jeep. They licensed it to Stellantis. it was great to be an LLC. The beauty of an LLC is you can always start as an LLC and become a C Corp. You cannot start as a C Corp and become an LLC. You technically can, but it's a tax nightmare. So what I tell people when we're talking, if you're debating, start as an LLC. I can convert you to a C Corp tomorrow if I had to, if I had a gun in my head. I'd rather not. I'd rather give me a few more days. But if I had to, I could. An LLC gives you what's called pass-through taxation. So do people know what that is? So yeah, just one layer of tax instead of two. So that's really great. It's a little messier for incentive compensation, rewarding your employees, but you can still do it. And it also gives you, there's some really exotic, so we'll talk about section 1202. Maybe we'll talk about it now. Have people in here heard of QSBS or section 1202 stuff? Okay, good, it means you're not nerds. So QSBS is a special kind of stock that it's called qualified small business stock. And you have to meet some other parameters. You have to hold it for 5 years is kind of a big one. But if you do that, you can exclude up to $10 million of gain when you sell your company. Big number. And if you work with venture capitalists or sometimes private equity funds, they really want you to be QSBS certified, qualified, whatever. So an LLC can't really get QSBS. It has to be a C Corp. But there's a really cool thing you can do, which I won't go into the details, but if you start as an LLC, take investment, and convert to a C Corp, you can actually get way more than 10 million. So the way QSBS works is you get either 10 million or 10 times your basis excluded as gain. So you can play this little game, and it's not like you're not going to wear pinstripes or go to a Venezuelan prison for doing this. But if you do it right, I mean, you can exclude $100 million. Well, that's not true. You can exclude up to $50 million of gain if you ever sell your company. So QSBS can be a really powerful tool if you're going to sell your company. Now, if I were an HVAC company, I'd never do it in a million years. The reason why is you're never going to sell the stock of your company to someone that can take advantage of it. And in the meantime, you're signing yourself up for double tax for your whole operating life. So I wouldn't do it. So it's very case by case. Yeah.
So I guess, number one, what was the genesis of that particular tax law, I'm guessing?
Uh-huh.
And number two, what is the exit strategy cons to, let's say somebody comes along and says, hey, let's do this.
Yeah.
And it's within the 5-year term.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So, all right, I'm going to go to Nerd Town for just a second here. So the reason QSBS was started was, the thesis was to foster investment in small privately held businesses and give people a big incentive to invest in those, is the thesis. We'll talk about S Corps. The con of QSBS, so I'd say about 90% of all sales of companies under 100 million, which is the vast majority, the buyer buys your assets, not your stock. So there's two ways to buy a company. You can buy the stock, or you can buy the assets. If you buy the stock, you step into the shoes of that company. So if they have a problem, you have a problem. But it can be very clean if there's a lot of intellectual property, if there's a lot of contracts, you just need to just step into their shoes. It's great. Again, most buyers don't want that. They say, you know what, I'm just going to buy this asset and that asset, and you keep that lawsuit that you have against you and that undisclosed tax liability. That's still your problem. The big advantage of buying assets is the purchaser gets to depreciate those assets when they buy it. So I see some nodding. So if I buy your company for $100 million, but it's the assets, it really only costs me about $65 million. And so to get QSBS treatment, it has to be a stock sale. So a lot of times what we say is, hey, buyer, you really want to buy the assets. We'd rather you buy the stock because we get long-term capital gain. It's cleaner. how about you buy the assets, but pay us $10 million more? And a lot of times they do that, because they still come out ahead in that situation. So, does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, that was very minutia, but, yeah.
Here's some more minutia.
Yeah.
Let's say you have a section 1202 corporation.
Yep,
And you are an angel investor and you band together with some other angel investors.
yep.
And you form an LLC to invest in that company.
Uh-huh.
Is your investment still qualified for the?
It can be, yep.
And are you investing in the LLC that owns
Yep.
the stock, or are you investing in the company?
Yep, so the LLC that invests in the company can qualify for 1202 treatment when it sells. You still have to tick some boxes, and I would, 1202 also, like law firms can't get 1202 treatment. There's like some other nuances that are, but I'm happy to sort of walk you through the minutia. But yeah, that's how, I mean, most, VC funds are limited partnerships, which very much align with LLCs, so.
Question.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Maybe you'll get to this, but is there a
This
way?
is fun, thanks for being interactive, yeah.
Like when you're a new, very, very new
Yep.
tech startup and you're
Yep.
trying to construct your company and your strategy,
Yep.
what would you advise in order to be attractive for a buyer to buy stock rather than assets?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things I'm happy to share with anyone, Robbie, maybe we can blast it out, but, I share a due diligence checklist with companies very often. So when a buyer is gonna buy a company, they send you this god-awful list of like 100 questions as they start the process. Tell me about any employees you terminated, show me all your contracts. Have you had any tax liens? If it's a construction company, what OSHA issues have you had, whatever. And so I would give you that and say, make sure all of this is clean. You don't want to have any problems here. I think having a really clean, what we call cap table, so ownership, when I'm representing a buyer and we're looking at a company and there's 100 people on the cap table, I'm like, oh, we're for sure not doing a stock deal. It's just a mess. I have to hold these cats. Who are these people? Like, we'll just buy the assets and pull it out of there. So again, per my earlier slide, don't have Uncle Joey, who doesn't know what they're doing, if you can avoid it, be an investor with weird terms. Yeah, and I could definitely double click on that more, but I still think starting as an LLC is great. It preserves so much optionality. I think other than like an operating Main Street company, don't be an S corp. That will kill you. So do people know what S corps are in this room?
Yes, but if you could expand on
Yeah,
that'd
you
be
bet.
great.
Yeah, so S corps were a provision put in the tax code very begrudgingly by the IRS it was a precursor to, so this was long before LLCs and other entities existed. And it was the first pass-through, really, under subsection K, tax-afforded or tax-advantaged business. And the IRS didn't want to do this, but it did it. And so an S corp has some very strong limitations. So first of all, you can't have any corporate owners of an S corp. So if you're thinking about it, if you're trying to sell an S corp to a company, say you want to sell to New Belgium, and you have an S corp, they literally cannot buy your stock. It would, what we call, blow that selection. So right there, that's a big problem. You can't have any foreign owners. So you think about that, well, maybe I want to incentivize someone with a green card, or green card is like a debatable thing with S corps right now, but a student or something. Nope, that blows your S selection. You can't have a trust own, other than a very specific type of qualified trust. You can't have a trust own an S corp. You can't have more than 75 shares, or 75 owners of an S corp, really. I'm giving the generalities here, so there's kind of exceptions to almost everything I say. So there's all these limitations, and then if you do any of that wrong, you get taxed as a C corp, and then go back to when you screwed it up and get that money back. So the consequences are really high. There's also some really bad things if you own real estate in an S corp. Get it out now. Any reasonable lawyer can help you do that. But like if I'm an HVAC company, what a lot of my clients do is they have the operating company that goes out and does the work, and then they have a building where all the trucks come back at night and whatnot. That's a different company. They rent it to the operating company. That's what you want to do for a million reasons. There's one advantage to S Corp, and it's a pretty real advantage for certain people. So a lot of our like surgeons, endodontists, people like that are still S Corps. And that's because you don't have to pay self-employment tax on everything you take out. So on a LLC, you pay self-employment tax on all the money up to the limits on every dollar you take out of an LLC. In an S Corp, you pay yourself a reasonable salary. What's a reasonable salary? No one knows. There was a really aggressive accountant in Boulder who used to be like, $50 is a reasonable salary, and all those clients got audited and penalties, and it sucked. So that's not reasonable. But if you're, a construction company and you're an S Corp and you pay the manager $100,000, reasonable. And then everything above that, say they take out $1 million, everything else is not subject to self-employment tax. So, you pay 15 and change percent up to about, I think it's $250,000 a year right now. And then you pay 4% on everything forever. So if you're making $1 million a year and you have the kind of business that's not going to raise capital, not going to have other owners, and you're not thinking you'll ever sell the stock, it can still make sense. There's a kind of a cool planning strategy we use now, where if like an HVAC company is a great example, the way we actually do that, we have the HVAC company be a LLC, and then we have the owners own their interest in the LLC in an S Corp. And that way, they can still sell the company if they want. Each owner can do whatever they want in their S Corp. So I always also give the example, like I work with an accounting firm. One guy's really frugal, drives like a 1985 4Runner. The other guy loves Range Rovers. So they each own their shares in the accounting firm in their own S Corp. The one guy deducts his Range Rover in his S Corp, and the other guy doesn't, care. He just drives his 86 4Runner. But that way, they both get to take advantage of the tax code the way they want. They're not screwing up the company. It's still very marketable. So there are some ways you can navigate it. Yeah.
How hard is it to change
from an S Corp to a C Corp? Not hard at all. Unless you've done a few weird things. And usually you haven't. From a S Corp to a LLC, really hard. From a C Corp to a S Corp, pretty hard. You kind of have to take a tax hit when you do that. So that's why I say it's, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but it's really good to be thoughtful and just like an ounce of prevention goes further than 50 pounds of cure for stuff like this. It's like, let's just think about it. We don't know the future perfectly, but let's just give it a little thought.
You had an S Corp and you operated that way until you knew you were ready to maybe take on investors and stuff, then you could convert to.
You can do it, yep, absolutely. And people definitely do that.
Okay.
It'd be much easier in general to start as an LLC and convert to a C Corp. But if you had to do it, you can definitely do it. All right, how are we doing? You're probably going way over. Yep, thanks. This is great though. Safe financings for those venture folks, I'm just gonna flag one thing, people who might take angel or investment. The IRS is putting together new regulations about safes into LLCs, and it's not good. So if you have an LLC, does everyone here know what a safe is? Great, this is fun. So a safe is just a contractual investment in a company. So when you have a brand new tech startup, how much is your company worth? No idea. Yeah, it's the only right answer. You have no idea. And so what a safe is, there is a tool called a convertible note, which is what we all used to use for a long time. What a safe is like, hey, I'm gonna give you $100,000. We don't really know what your company's worth right now. So I'm gonna give you $100,000. You agree that the simple agreement for future equity, that's what it stands for. You agree that when you raise capital in the future, or if you sell, my safe converts into equity in your company at a certain formula. So usually what it is it's like a discount. You get a kicker for being an early investor in the company. But if you're an LLC, the IRS is considering treating this as a current investment. So you have to get a K-1 and other things, or it could be ordinary income when it converts. So if you're gonna have a LLC, be really careful with safes. Talk to someone who knows what they're doing. I'm happy to talk to anyone here for free, about that, but you just have to be careful. All right, I'll be quick on here, and again, interrupt me at will. But we talked about founders getting the right people together, cap table. You talked about cap table, sir. So I call it the Costa Rican surfing clause. A lot of times you get 2 or 3 people together who want to start a company, and then someone says, man, I really, I had a change of heart. I'm going to move to Costa Rica and do a remote job. Or we see this all the time. I got my dream job at Google or Apple or name the company. They're going to pay me $500,000 a year. Sorry, I can't do the startup anymore. Well, if you have, if that owner of your new tech company has 50% of the company and you don't have a way to get it back, you're never raising capital, and you're going to have a really hard time selling your business. And so what we want to do is we want to put in vesting, and all vesting means is you have to pay to play. You have to invest your time, energy, resources into the company in order to keep your equity. Also, almost all investors, and I know I'm biasing a little bit towards venture capital, but all venture capitalists will require you to what we call revest. So when they give you $10 million, they're like, oh, and by the way, your shares are now going to vest, or at least a portion of them, over 3-4 years. You have to stay here to keep your shares. So that's coming. So just being aware of that. So I'm going a little quick now because I realized we went really long. Well, I can dig into any of this. If anyone wants to, just reach out to me. I'm happy to talk. Cap table management. So building your accounting infrastructure with any kind of business early is so important. Having been an accountant for a long time, there's good accountants pay for themselves 10x, whether it's an HVAC company, a startup, whatever. The ability to expense your phone, track your expenses, all that, do that right day one. There's a lot of great tools for that. Cap table management, if you're going to raise capital, if you're a high growth startup, there's Carta, there's Ledger. If you work with any reputable law firm that does this kind of work, don't quote me on this exact amount, but Carta's free until you've raised $1 million or have more than, I think, like 50 shareholders. But Carta is a platform that literally takes money out of my pocket and gives you a better experience. So it keeps track of all your owners, who has what, vesting schedules, stock options. You can even execute stock options through that platform. It's a really great tool. I get no kick, literally it takes money out of my pocket because it's something we could do. But it's a great tool. If you work with someone like us or Cooley or Wilson, you get a 20% discount once you cross that $1 million in perpetuity. So it does get, if you've raised millions of dollars, it probably costs $5 or $10 grand a year to do it. If you haven't raised $1 million, it's free. So, if it's more a Main Street business, you can use it in perpetuity. All right, any questions there? I kind of skipped a lot. All right, couple more big ones here. So intellectual property, for a startup, for a tech company, for a biotech company, for a clean energy company, employees are very important, but oftentimes your intellectual property is actually your value proposition. Protecting that intellectual property is so important. So a few things. And our intellectual property laws are terrible. Hopefully they'll get better. So it's really interesting. So a trademark, your brand, if you have an HVAC company, if you have a new app, whatever, your brand, it doesn't have to be the name of your company, but your brand, you can have a trade name and or a trademark. So a trade name, you can file in Colorado, I think it's $10. You can just start using it. If you want to get federal protection, you file a U.S. Patent and Trademark Office action. All in, it costs about $2,000, including filing fees and whatnot. But your trademark, you want to start using as soon as possible with your business. Put it out there. Get it out there. I will tell you, whether you work with someone like us or not, if your brand is really important, so if it's a new clothing company, if it's a food company, do something called a knockout search. There's companies that do it. It costs about $600, $800. I'll give you a horror story. So I worked with a company called Soul Bites, and if anyone grew up with those terrible, like Kraft, like 4 crackers, a red stick, and some really gnarly Velveeta cheese. Yeah. So imagine the new hippie, healthy version of this. It was a yin-yang design, and it was like very like hummus or, you know, really healthy, organic stuff, and then crackers or pita on the other side, and it was for camping. Super cool. It was called Soul Bites. And they just got picked up in REI. They got picked up in, I forget, like Natural Grocers. And we didn't work with them initially. They came to us kind of midstream. And so invested in packaging, branding, new website, whatever. And then I think it was Frito-Lay sent them a letter, and they're like, what the hell are you doing? Like, we own this brand. How are you, what, are you crazy? You have to, and the thing about the patent and trademark office is you have to enforce it. If you own a mark, you have to enforce it. So it's not even that they were jerks, they have to do this. So put that company out of business. It was like right at the perfectly wrong time, where they had just invested all this money. So a knockout search solves that issue. Because a lot of people will tell me, oh, I Googled it, no one has this name. I'm like, no one in Louisiana has this name? You know, like, are you sure you checked? And sometimes too, it's Mexico, Canada, you gotta be careful with other laws. So a knockout search, if your name is important, do it early and often. I'm not trying to scare you, it's just, it's probably the best $600 you can spend if your brand's important. Interestingly, patents work the exact opposite as trademarks. So as soon as you put anything that's patentable into the public sphere, you waive your right to your ability to patent it. So it's so, you're like, wait, trademark, I want to get out right away. Patent, if I'm going to go to a trade show or present a paper at a university, that's public, not just to your like peers, that blows your ability to patent it. What? So patent, you have to be really careful the other way. And what you have to do is, or what I would recommend doing, there's something called a provisional patent, which you might have heard the term. So a lot of times, patents are really expensive. Like, sophisticated patents can cost $50,000 to file. And so if you have something that you think is patentable, talk to a patent, I'm not a patent attorney, I don't know why I waved at myself, but talk to someone who does that. See if it is patentable, see if it makes sense. A lot of times you can do a provisional patent for $1,500, $2,000, and that'll at least timestamp it and protect you for a while. The other thing you can always do is what's called a trade secret. And so patents, interestingly too, they only last for 17 years, and then they're public. So when you hear about like drugs coming off patent or whatever, and then they're really cheap, because you actually have to put your secret sauce out in the universe, and then after 17 years, everyone gets to use your secret sauce. Versus like Coca-Cola is the ultimate example of a trade secret. Literally 2 people at any given time know how Coca-Cola is made exactly. It's been around for 150 years or whatever. No one, it's not on patent, it's just they kept that secret. So a lot of intellectual property can actually be a trade secret if you don't need to put it out there in the universe, and it's a much better protection than a patent, and you pay lawyers exactly $0 to do it, so it can be really good. So I know I had some talking points up here, but I think the main takeaway is I want to give people is your intellectual property, even for an HVAC company, you know, where you wouldn't necessarily think of that, can be such a value. Your clients, your pricing, how you work with vendors, you know, there's so many things that can be intellectual property in a business. And just talk to someone and make sure you're capitalizing on that, because 9 times out of 10, that's what someone will buy. No offense to you all, they're not buying the people. They're buying, oh, you figured out a special way to do this, or you have these great clients, or you have these great contracts. That's what they buy. So protecting that's really important. Okay, I'll take a quick break there, yeah, because
How much do international patents add to the total cost?
yeah, so there's a treaty, I'm not an IP lawyer, so I'll just, I'm a corporate venture guy. There's a treaty that gets you like, I forget how many, like 20 countries, most of the ones you want. And I think it's like $800 to add it once you've done a US one. If you want to connect with me, my partner Emily, she is awesome. She could give you like the exact numbers. This is what she does all day, every day.
So it's not prohibitive, that's amazing.
It's not too bad. Once you, because everyone knows the US patent process is really brutal. So they're like, oh, we can just bolt those on to, you know, Mexico, Costa Rica, whatever, a bunch of countries. What was I gonna say?
And so you may want to defer on this one. So years ago, there was my understanding is that there was a new patent structure, which was process patent.
Uh-huh, yep.
And in today's world with data,
Yeah,
if people are manipulating data
yeah.
in a particular way, is that patentable?
It's such a great question. So business process patents fell really out of favor for a while. And because of technology, and some of the things we're doing with algorithms and other processes, they've actually come back into vogue. So again, it's a case-by-case situation, you need to look at it, but there can be very much a good use and viability of business process patents. They're usually not as hard to get as like I can say this because it's public, like our firm works with like Harley Davidson or Milwaukee Tool, and they're making like a new battery, like that's very technical, why this battery is different than that battery. A business process is actually a lot easier to explain. The other thing is, so for software, I kind of left this out, apologies, it's copyright normally, is how you protect software. So Bill Gates spent like $1 gazillion when there was a lawsuit with Apple, and that kind of changed the law. So software, algorithms, things like that can be copyrightable, which is a whole different animal, but also can give some great protection. All right. I'll just say, man, I really went over, sorry, guys, these questions, you guys asked so many questions. Employees, I will just say, be really careful with employees if they're working remotely, if they're working all over. As you might surmise, California and New York are like really challenging places to have employees, and it opens up a whole can of worms if your employee worked there. It's called the Nexus thing. So with employees, just be really, really careful where they are. And then the last thing I'd say, kind of to your point, sir, is there are a lot of different, I talked about venture, but Colorado, if you go on my LinkedIn, I'm on the board of something called Startup Colorado. There's a lot of low interest, lower qualification financing from Colorado up to 150 grand for debt. Very low interest, not personal guarantee, no recourse. There's all sorts of what we call non-dilutive financing tools. So if you're going to raise capital, don't feel like there's only one option, or if you can't get VC, no one will give you money. There's so many tools. There's all kinds of venture debt. There's grants. There's I work with a lot of companies that do royalty financing. So you say, hey, we'll take a 3% royalty on your revenue until we make a return of Y, and then your company's your company. You never have to give up ownership. So there's so many tools out there. Don't feel pinched that it's kind of a one size or nothing. Oh, the other thing I'd say really quick, and then I think we're at time here. So a really good friend of mine is the general counsel for Oculus, if you know, like Meta bought them. And he kept finding that companies just weren't getting set up right, weren't getting educated right. So he created what we call a startup platform, or startup program rather. And so that's something we have that's like an educational platform, and then also creates like a document automation platform. So I'm not going to be salesy. If you need a new company and you want to use the doc automation, great. It's a good way to do it. We actually use it for CSU, all the companies coming out of CSU now. But if you just want the education, let me know. I'm happy to give you access to like the video library and stuff. It has a lot, almost everything I talked about. There's a video that's the double click of what I talked about. Happy to share it. So, and we had great questions throughout, but I'm happy to stay, if there's other questions. I'm pointing at Robbie just in case.
We can,
I'll give it to you. Yeah, it's, I'm a LinkedIn power user, so that's an easy way. Just Stigler is my last name, Shawn Stigler.
And what's your first name?
Shawn, Shawn. I promise I won't sell you something if you have questions. I love, like, I was telling Elizabeth, getting to work with all these different companies from natural foods to defense to, you know, carbon recapture. It's like the joy of my life, so happy to answer questions and be helpful, so. Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming, yeah, appreciate it, yeah.